I didn't make a scene. I didn't demand an explanation. I took my daughter's hand, turned around, and walked back to my car. That was the moment everything changed. My name is Megan. I'm 32 years old. I have a 7-year-old daughter named Sophie, a 2-bedroom apartment in Austin, Texas, and exactly one lesson I've learned the hard way. Some people will take everything you offer them and still find a way to make you feel like the problem. My husband, James, died 4 years ago. Brain aneurysm. No warning, no goodbye. He was 31, perfectly healthy as far as any of us knew. And then one Tuesday morning he was just gone. Sophie was 3. She barely remembers his voice now, and that is the thing that breaks me in the middle of the night when the apartment is quiet and I can't sleep. James had a life insurance policy. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to keep us stable $190,000. I put $80,000 into a college fund for Sophie, locked it away where I couldn't touch it even in my worst months. The rest I kept liquid, telling myself it was for emergencies, for Sophie's future, for whatever we needed. What I didn't plan for was my younger sister. Danielle is 28. She has always been the kind of person who fills a room, loud laugh, big energy, the kind of girl who makes strangers feel like old friends within 10 minutes. Growing up, she was everyone's favorite, my mother's favorite, especially. Not in a cruel way, not the way you read about in those dramatic stories, just in that quiet, constant way, where one child always gets a little more grace, a little more patience, a little more benefit of the doubt. Danielle was that child. She had a dream. She'd had it since she was 16, working weekends at a local bakery and coming home smelling like cinnamon and brown butter. She wanted to open her own restaurant. Not a diner, not a cafe, a real restaurant. Exposed brick walls, a curated seasonal menu, the kind of place food critics write about in Sunday papers. She called it her vision. She talked about it at every holiday table, sketched layouts on napkins, saved photos on her phone of interiors she loved. The problem was that Danielle had never been good with money. Not recklessly bad, not gambling debt bad, just perpetually behind. She'd started culinary school twice and dropped out both times, once because of tuition, once because of a boyfriend who turned out to be a dead end. By the time she was 26, she had no degree, no savings, and a resume that was a patchwork of prep cook jobs and catering gigs. When she came to me, she didn't ask for money outright. That wasn't Danielle's style. She sat at my kitchen table while Sophie was at school, and she talked for 2 hours about how close she was, how she had a mentor now, a real one, a chef named Victor who believed in her, how she'd found a perfect space in the South Congress corridor, a former wine bar that already had the kitchen infrastructure, how she had one investor interested, a man named Richard Hartwell, who had backed 2 other local restaurants that were now thriving. I just need the gap covered, she said. Richard is putting in $200,000. The space requires a $250 deposit to hold it, plus the first build-out payment. I need $45,000, Meg. That's it. That's the difference between this happening and this not happening. I asked her about a bank loan. She'd already tried. Her credit history was thin. I asked about our mother. Our mother was retired and living on a fixed income. I asked about the groom's side. She wasn't married. That wasn't relevant. I asked every practical question I could think of, and for every one, Danielle had an answer ready. I want to be honest about what happened next, because it matters. I didn't give her the money out of fear. I didn't give it because she manipulated me, or guilted me, or threatened to stop speaking to me. I gave it because she was my sister, and she was sitting at my kitchen table with actual tears in her eyes, and I had the money, and I believed her. That's the plain truth. I believed she would do something extraordinary with it. We wrote up a loan agreement. My idea, not hers. She wasn't thrilled about it, said it felt like I didn't trust her, but she signed it. The terms were simple. If the restaurant turned a profit within 18 months, she'd begin repaying me in monthly installments. No interest. Just the principal back, whenever she could manage it. I wrote the check. $45,000 from the account that was supposed to be my emergency cushion. The money James left behind for his daughter's life. Danielle hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. For the next 18 months, I watched from the outside as Soleil came to life. That was the name she chose, French for sun. She sent me photos of the build-out, the custom bar top, the hand-painted mural on the back wall. She texted me menu items to try at home, asked for my opinion on font choices for the logo. My mother called me twice to say how proud she was of Danielle, and both times I waited for her to say something about me, about what I had made possible. Both times, she didn't. I told myself it didn't matter. The restaurant opening would be the moment. Danielle would introduce me to Richard, to Victor, to everyone who had made Soleil real. She would say, in front of all of them, "This is my sister. She believed in me when no one else could." I told Sophie about it for weeks. "Mommy's sister is opening a restaurant, and we're going to go on the opening night and have the most beautiful dinner you've ever seen." Sophie picked out her dress herself, navy blue with white stars, her favorite. She wore her hair in 2 braids and asked if she could bring her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hops, and I said yes because it was a celebration. We drove to South Congress on a Friday evening in October. The restaurant was glowing from half a block away, warm light spilling out through the front windows, music floating out every time the door opened. A small crowd gathered on the sidewalk. It looked exactly like Danielle's sketches. It looked better. There was a young woman at the door with a tablet, checking names. I walked up with Sophie's hand in mine and gave my name, Megan Calloway. She scrolled again, looked up with that careful, apologetic expression that people train themselves to wear when delivering bad news. I'm not seeing you on the list. Could it be under a different name? I gave her James's last name, my maiden name, every variation I could think of. Nothing. Let me get the manager, she said. The manager was a man in his 30s with a headset and a pressed shirt. He stepped outside, glanced at me, glanced at Sophie, and delivered the message with the practiced neutrality of someone who had been briefed. Miss, Danielle asked that this evening be kept to ticketed guests and VIP invitees only. I don't have you on either list. I'm very sorry. I looked through the glass door. The restaurant was half full already, elegant in exactly the way Danielle had always described. And near the bar, in a green silk dress, holding a glass of wine and laughing at something a man beside her said was my sister. She saw me. I know she did. Our eyes met for exactly 2 seconds through that glass. Then she turned her face away and laughed again at whatever the man was saying. I stood there for one more moment. Then I looked down at Sophie. She was watching me with those serious eyes she gets when she's trying to understand something. Are we going in, Mama? Not tonight, baby, I said. Let's go get pizza instead. Sophie thought about this for a moment, then said pizza sounded great, and asked if Mr. Hops could have a breadstick. I said absolutely, and we walked back to the car. I didn't cry until she was asleep. I didn't text Danielle that night. I wasn't ready. I sat in my kitchen after Sophie went to bed, and I thought about that moment at the door, and I thought about the loan agreement sitting in my filing cabinet, and I thought about James's face, and I thought about $45,000. I texted her the next morning. One sentence. I was at the door last night with Sophie. We weren't on the list. She read it. I could see the read receipt. She didn't reply. My mother called that afternoon. I knew before I answered that it wasn't going to go the way I needed it to. Danielle told me you made a scene at the restaurant, she said. I set down my coffee cup very carefully so I wouldn't drop it. I didn't make a scene. I gave my name, was told I wasn't on the list, and I left. She said you were aggressive with the staff. Mom. Sophie was with me. Sophie was in a dress she picked out herself because I told her we were celebrating her aunt's restaurant. There was a pause. Danielle has a lot of pressure on her right now. Opening night was important for investors. She needed it to go perfectly. I waited to hear the rest of that sentence. The part where my mother said something about the $45,000 that had made the opening night possible. The part where she said that being excluded, having her granddaughter excluded, was wrong. The rest of the sentence didn't come. I understand, I said. Because what else was there to say? I hung up and went to check on Sophie, who was in the living room building something elaborate with her Legos and explaining the architectural decisions to Mr. Hops. I sat on the floor next to her and helped her find a blue piece she was looking for, and I made a decision. I was going to be very quiet, and I was going to wait. What I didn't know yet was that I wasn't the only one who had been watching from the outside. Richard Hartwell called me on Monday. I didn't know he had my number. I picked up because I didn't recognize the area code, and I always pick up unknown numbers since James died. Old habit. Emergency reflex. Miss Calloway, he said. My name is Richard Hartwell. I believe you know who I am. I knew the name from Danielle's loan conversations and from the restaurant website, which listed him as a founding partner. I said yes. I knew who he was. I was at the restaurant Friday evening, he said. I was standing near the entrance when you arrived with your daughter. I heard the exchange with the manager. I saw Danielle through the window when she looked at you. I didn't say anything. I've been doing business for a long time, he said. I've made a lot of investments, and I've learned that the single most reliable predictor of how a person will treat their customers, their staff, and their partners is how they treat their family. Specifically, how they treat the people in their family who have done the most for them. I was gripping the phone very hard by this point. I need to ask you something, he said. Is it true that you provided a significant portion of the initial funding that made Soleil possible? Danielle told me during our due diligence conversations that she covered the deposit gap herself through personal savings. I'm now understanding that may not have been accurate. I went to my filing cabinet. I photographed the loan agreement. I emailed it to Richard Hartwell while he was still on the phone. He was quiet for a moment as he read it. Then he said, "Thank you for your time, Miss Calloway," and he hung up. I sat down at my kitchen table. I thought about Danielle in that green silk dress. I thought about how she had told her investor that she had personal savings. I thought about how she had taken the one thing I had left of my husband's care for his daughter and used it to fund a story about herself that left me out entirely. I thought about Sophie asking if Mr. Hops could have a breadstick, and I understood, fully and finally, what the last 18 months had actually been. What happened next, I didn't engineer. I want to be clear about that. I didn't call Richard back to push him. I didn't contact Danielle's staff or her vendors, or her PR firm. I just answered one phone call honestly, sent one document, and then I went about my life. Richard pulled his $200,000. He didn't do it quietly, either. He sent a formal letter to Soleil's LLC, which I learned about later, through a source I'll get to, citing misrepresentation of capitalization sources during the investment process. In simple terms, Danielle had told him her financing was personal savings. It wasn't. She had used a private loan from a family member without disclosing it. That distinction mattered to Richard legally and ethically, and he had the kind of lawyers who made sure it mattered on paper too. Without Richard's capital, Soleil was operating on fumes from opening week revenue alone. The second month's lease payment was due in 30 days. The equipment financing had balloon payments coming. Victor, the mentor chef, had a contract with specific performance guarantees that Danielle could no longer credibly meet. Danielle called me on a Wednesday night, 11 days after Richard's letter went out. Sophie was already asleep. I was grading papers. I work as a middle school English teacher, another thing Danielle had never quite considered interesting enough to ask about. I saw her name on my phone and I answered. She didn't say hello. She started talking immediately, and the words came fast and hot and tangled together. She said Richard had betrayed her. She said someone had gone behind her back. She said her lawyers were involved. She said the restaurant was going to survive this because she had a plan. She always had a plan. Then her voice shifted, and she said, "Did you talk to him, Meg?" "He called me," I said. "He asked me a direct question." I answered it honestly. "You destroyed my restaurant." I let that sit for a moment. "Danielle," I said, "I drove to your restaurant with your niece in a dress she picked out for your celebration. You looked at us through the window and turned away." Silence. "You told your investor you had personal savings. You used James's insurance money and called it yours." More silence. "I have the loan agreement," I said. "I've always had the loan agreement. You signed it. I want to work out a repayment schedule that works for both of us. That's all I want." She hung up. My mother called the next morning. This time her voice was different. Less mediation, more anger. She said I had always been jealous of Danielle. She said I had sabotaged her intentionally. She said I had used a private family matter to destroy a young woman's dream. I said, "Mom, I would like you to think about what you're saying. I paid $45,000 of James's money for Danielle's dream. I was told Sophie was a security risk at the door." My mother said, "You could have talked to her privately instead of going to her investor." Her investor came to me. She said she needed some time and she would call me when she was ready. She hasn't called back yet. It's been 3 weeks. I've stopped checking my phone the way I used to. Danielle came to my apartment on a Saturday afternoon, 12 days after our phone call. Sophie was at a birthday party 2 blocks away. I had dropped her off an hour earlier, which means either Danielle timed it that way, or she didn't. But either way, Sophie wasn't there. I heard the knocking before I reached the door. It was the kind of knocking that isn't really asking. I looked through the peephole. She was alone. She was in jeans and a gray sweater, and she looked like she hadn't slept properly in a week. I opened the door. She was inside before I had fully stepped back. She said things that I am not going to repeat here because some of them were about James, and I don't believe in giving those words more space than they've already taken up inside my head. She said things about Sophie. She said I had always wanted her to fail. She said the loan agreement was coercion. She said I had manipulated a grieving young woman. I stood in the middle of my living room and I let her finish. Then I said, "You should leave now. I'm going to call Sophie's babysitter and ask her to keep Sophie a little longer. And then I'm going to call the non-emergency police line and report this visit and what you've said. So there's a record. I'm not threatening you. I'm just telling you what's going to happen." She stared at me. "You can still call me," I said, "when you're ready to talk about repayment. My number hasn't changed." She left. I sat down on my couch, and I put my hands flat on my knees and I breathed for a while. Then I called Sophie's babysitter and asked if Sophie could stay another hour. I called the non-emergency line. I made a report, kept it factual, asked them to note the date and time. The officer who took the report was kind. He said if anything escalated, to call back. I called Richard Hartwell. I'm not sure why I called him. I think I needed to tell someone who would understand the full shape of what had just happened. My friends knew pieces. My therapist knew pieces. Richard knew the financial architecture in a way that made it easier to explain without having to justify why I had given the money in the first place. He listened. He said, "Are you and your daughter safe?" I said yes. He said, "Good." Then he said, "I want to ask you something, and you can absolutely say no. I've been thinking about a new project, a smaller concept, a brunch and lunch spot, very different from what Soleil was trying to be. I need someone I can trust on the financial and management side, someone with integrity. I'd like to have a conversation about whether that person could be you." I said, "I'm a middle school English teacher." He said, "You wrote a clean loan agreement and honored it when the other party didn't. That's more than most people who call themselves business partners do." I thought about that for a moment. "Let me think about it," I said. "Take your time," he said. I picked Sophie up from the birthday party that afternoon. She was covered in what appeared to be blue frosting from a cake that had apparently been enormous. She told me the entire plot of the birthday girl's favorite movie during the car ride home, and asked 3 times if we could get a fish, and sang a song she'd learned at school that made no grammatical sense but had an extremely catchy melody. I gave her a bath and made grilled cheese for dinner and sat on the edge of her bed while she told Mr. Hops about her day. Before she fell asleep, she said, "Mama, are we going to go to Aunt Danielle's restaurant again?" I smoothed her hair back. "Not for a while, baby." "Why?" "Because Aunt Danielle needs some time right now." Sophie considered this with the gravity she brings to all serious topics. "Is she sad?" "I think she is. Maybe we could send her a card." I kissed her forehead. "Maybe we could." I sat in the hallway for a while after her light was out, leaning against the wall. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel like absence, James's absence. Specifically, that particular shape of silence where a person used to be. It doesn't feel that way as much anymore. Most nights now it just feels like quiet. Soleil lasted 4 months after the opening. I read about the closure in a local food blog, a brief item that cited financial difficulties in the challenging post-pandemic restaurant landscape. There was no mention of Richard's withdrawal, no mention of the loan, no mention of a woman and her daughter standing at a door in October. Danielle didn't call to tell me. I found out the same way anyone else would have. My mother sent a text, just 3 words. "She lost it." I typed back, "I know, I'm sorry. I meant that. I want to be careful to say that I meant it. I never wanted Danielle to fail. I wanted her to succeed and to do it honestly, and to build something real. I wanted to be at a table in her restaurant with Sophie, watching her work in the place she had dreamed about since she was 16. I wanted that more than she probably knew. But I also know that wanting something for someone is not the same as being responsible for what they do with what you give them. The loan agreement is still in my filing cabinet. $45,000. No payment has come. My lawyer sent a formal demand letter last month. I don't know what will happen. These things take time and cost money, and end in places you didn't expect. I'm not holding my breath for a check. I'm not spending energy on anger about it either, because anger is expensive, and I have a daughter who needs the full version of me more than I need to be right. I had the first real conversation with Richard about his new project last week. We sat in a coffee shop on 6th Street for 2 hours, and I asked every practical question I could think of. And for every one, he had an answer that made sense. Not perfect sense, he was honest about the risks, the gaps, the things that would be hard. I appreciated that more than he knew. I told him I needed a few more weeks to think. He said, "Of course. But for what it's worth, the fact that you walked away from that door without making a scene, and still had the grace to take your daughter for pizza, told me more about who you are than any business plan ever could." I drove home thinking about that. About what it means to hold yourself together when every part of you wants to come apart. About the things you do quietly, that nobody sees. About contracts, the written ones and the ones you make with yourself. James used to say that the way you behave when no one is watching is the only version of yourself that actually matters. He said it to me once during an argument we were having about something so small, I can't even remember what it was now. I was annoyed when he said it. I told him that was a very convenient thing to say when you happen to be the one behaving well. He laughed. He had a very good laugh. I think about that more now. About the version of yourself that exists when the door is closed and the audience has gone home and you're just alone with the choices you've made. My sister has a version of herself she has to live with. I have mine. Sophie asked me this morning if I would teach her to make pancakes from scratch, because her friend at school said store-bought mix was basically cheating and she found this upsetting and wanted to be prepared. We spent 40 minutes on it. Sophie standing on her step stool at the counter, flour everywhere. Mr. Hops observing from a safe distance on the kitchen chair. They were uneven and slightly too thick and genuinely the best pancakes I've ever eaten. We put butter and maple syrup on them and ate them at the kitchen table in our pajamas. And Sophie told me about a book she was reading, and the morning light came through the window the way it does in October, and I thought, this is the thing. This is exactly the thing. Whatever comes next, the loan, Richard's project, my mother's silence, all of it, this is the thing I was protecting when I turned around and walked back to my car. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't perform. I just chose correctly. And then I went and got pizza with my daughter. Some contracts you sign in ink, some you just keep.